Hi, Brian here from GuitarDreams.com, and today I want to introduce you to the major scale. Now, I know the word scale scares off a lot of guitarists, but trust me, it isn't that complicated. And in today's lesson, I hope to introduce you to scales in a way that doesn't have you running off to the nearest pub. Well, if you're a teenager, I hope that doesn't apply, but the point is, this isn't like the movie The Fly. The phrase, be afraid, very afraid, that does not apply to scales. In today's guitar lesson, we're going to cover 5 areas. You're going to learn some basic theory about the major scale. You're going to learn the common ways to define the major scale. You're going to learn to play the major scale throughout the fretboard. You're going to get the sound of the major scale in your head. And you're going to develop some position shifting skills along the way that'll help you in pretty much any area of your guitar playing. So I hope you enjoy. Let's get started. First, let's take a look at a G major scale. Now, I could have chosen C major or any other scale. Just know that everything you learn about G major applies to any major scale. The concept is the important thing here. And if you don't read standard music notation, don't worry, there is tab as well. So what you're seeing here is standard notation of a G major scale, and tab that shows one way to play this particular scale. I happen to choose the low E string 3rd fret as a starting point. So that's 1 octave, G major scale. But again, it's the idea that counts here. So if I moved up 2 frets to A, I would have an A major scale. Or if I moved to D on the A string, I would have a D major scale. One thing to understand when talking about scales is intervals. An interval is just a spacing between 2 musical notes, and in the music world, intervals are labeled with numbers. A 2 means a major second, which is a whole step, or 2 frets, so G to A. 3 means a major third, so G to B. 4 means a perfect fourth, that's G to C. 5 means perfect fifth, so G to D. 6 means major sixth, so that's G to E. 7 is a major 7, for instance, G to F sharp. And then we get back to the root if we took an octave. And so you'll often see scales written out in terms of intervals, with the major scale written as root 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Or simply 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, where 1 means the root, or the starting note. You can of course read more about intervals online. For now I just wanted to mention the intervals in the major scale. I think intervals are the most useful way to think about scales, but you will often hear about scales being defined in terms of half and whole steps. Whereas intervals relate the first scale note to all other notes, we can also talk about the space from one note to the next. That is why you will sometimes see the major scale defined as W, W, H, W, 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 H. That means whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step. So start from G, go up a whole step to A, another whole step to B, a half step to C, a whole step up to D, another whole step to E, yet another whole step to F sharp, then a half step getting back to G. And you can apply this anywhere on the fretboard. You can even apply this on one string. Start from G on the high E string, A, B, C, D, E, F, or rather F sharp if we're in G major. So that's a G major scale. So there you have it. Some background on how scales are formed and the typical ways they are defined. If this all makes sense, then when I talk about the minor scale, melodic minor, harmonic minor, pentatonic, and other scales, then you'll already have a good conceptual starting point to build from. We're almost ready for the exercises, but let me say a quick word about chords. I know you're probably wondering, are we ever going to actually get to the exercises? But I think when you're first learning scales, it's really important to also think about chords. So let's get back to the diagram we looked at before. Most chords are made by stacking thirds, as we say. And for most scales, such as the major scale, we can see what chords it generates by taking the root, the third, the fifth, as well as the seventh. So with the G major scale, we end up with the G major triad if we take the root, third, and fifth. Or start from D, from any note. That's how we define triad. You might be familiar with bar chords for playing major chords. It's G major as a triad chord because it contains the root, the third, and the fifth. If we add the 7, we end up with a major 7 chord. That's the root, the third, the fifth, and the 7th. So with G, adding that 7th gets us a little jazzier. And you might be familiar with some shapes for playing a major 7 chord. That's a G major 7 chord. So the idea applies to any major scale. Again, it's the concepts that are important. And maybe you've heard about modes, and we'll get to that in later lessons. And when we talk about modes, we'll talk about other chord types that go along with the other degrees of the major scale. Chord types such as minor, dominant, half diminished. But for now, I just wanted to show you the construction of a major chord because that's what we're going to be playing over in the backing track for the exercise. So let's move on. When we get to the exercise, you'll notice in the tab that it shows the chord tones, the root, the third, and the fifth. So with G major, the G, the B, and the D as accented notes, meaning a little greater than sign, which you'll see in the tab. That means play that note with extra emphasis. And those are all the downbeats. And that's a useful way to practice because that reinforces melody, since in most Western music, it is those chord tones that play the most prominent role in the melodies, with the other notes kind of spicing things up. So that's all I wanted to say for now about chords. So let's finally get on to playing some G major scales. For now, I'm just going to show you one shape for a G major scale, and then we're going to move that around the fretboard. With G major, we could start at the low E string, 3rd fret. And you could also say the notes out loud as you play them, which reinforces your knowledge of where the notes on the fretboard are. So G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, G. Or you could say the intervals, which is a good way to reinforce the relationship between the intervals in the major scale. Root, root, major second, major third, perfect fourth, perfect fifth, major sixth, major 7, octave. Now that you get the idea of how to practice, you can start thinking about why the guitar is such a difficult instrument. It's because we can play the same thing in multiple places and multiple octaves. With a G major scale, how about the 10th fret A string? That's a G, so we can play the same shape. Or how about the 5th fret D string? That's also a G. Notice the shape's a little different because of the spacing between the G and the B string is a major third, not a perfect fourth like between other adjacent strings. Or how about the 12th fret G string? Now again, with the G and B string, things are a little different, but it's still the same basic shape. You could also play from the 10th fret B string. Now that involves some stretching and some sliding, and I won't have you doing that shape, but just to get you thinking about the many ways that one can actually play a major scale on the guitar fretboard. Okay, so now we're going to get to the exercise finally, where you're going to combine some of those shapes and try to play them fluidly by shifting positions and still keeping good time. And like I said earlier, you can reinforce those chord tones. So here's the tablature for the exercise, and you see here you'll be playing 4 different versions of that G major scale, all as eighth notes. And the key is to try to play this smoothly, to do those transitions in such a way that you're still keeping good time. And when you're ready, just listen for the 2-bar count in, and then on the 3rd bar, that's when you'll start playing. So if you're ready, let's begin. Okay, once you're comfortable playing that exercise at a slow tempo, it's time to speed things up a bit, because that'll really reinforce that position shifting skill. And you know, not a lot of people talk about position shifting as its own technique on the guitar. But you know, there's a physicality to playing the guitar, and position shifting is a great technique that'll translate to a lot of areas of your playing, including phrasing. Now, in this exercise, I'm going to play at a pretty quick tempo, 16th notes at 160 beats per minute. But don't worry if you can't play at that speed. Play at whatever tempo you feel comfortable with, and just gradually build up. And after a while, you'll really be amazed at your ability to shift positions and not even think about it. And that's what this exercise is all about. It's to get the muscle memory such that you're not thinking about how your hand has to shift. It's just going to happen. So here is the exercise, again with 2-measure count in and starting on the 3rd bar. Now, like I said, don't worry if you can't play up to that tempo yet. It'll take some practice, some time, some discipline, but the idea is to develop your position shifting to such an extent that any point on the fretboard is accessible at any point in time. And that coordination is going to translate to other areas of your playing. For instance, you could play a G major arpeggio, a triad arpeggio, in 4 octaves using this kind of idea. Something like this. You could start on the low E string, 3rd fret. That's G, B, D. That's a G major triad. It's also a G major triad. Again, the root, 3rd, 5th, G, B, D. Yet another octave, G, B, D. And the 4th octave. So you could play that fluidly. And as you get more and more comfortable with position shifting, you'll be able to pull off those kind of passages pretty fluidly as well. Okay, that's it. I know we covered a lot of material, but I think this will be useful as we get into more advanced lessons on scales. And even if you're an experienced player, maybe you took away something here. So that's it. I hope to see you in the next lesson.